But most, if what you're interested in is tell me, and this is what policymakers want, tell me what's happening now, what might happen tomorrow. They don't care about theory. They don't care about history. And that's why there's a divide between political science as an academic field and people who deal with political science in the real world. And I can tell you just as a personal anecdote, when I first entered government, I had my master's degree and I thought I was a pretty good student and I knew my stuff. And I arrived in the Ministry of Defense and basically it's like going to boot camp and starting life from scratch because by the way, I tell my students who are interested in academic careers, in governmental careers, and people, let's say, who've got their masters or maybe even PhDs, and I say, you're going to have to unlearn everything that you have spent years and lots of effort and lots of money learning, because the analytical tools that you were taught in a university are very different from what is used in the government.
I don't want to, I mean, I'm a humorous man, but the only thought I could have is, you just like working your time saying that you get no respect, no respect.
And the first couple of years are really hard because everything that you write and you once thought you knew how to write well is being rewritten. And sometimes by the time it goes up a echelon or two, you can barely recognize what you wrote. But when you finish that learning process, again, I think it's an incomparable learning process that people, straight academics who've never gone through it, don't have.
Okay, so I'm going to jump one more time here because I heard another interesting note there, which is that what content that you create, the articles that you write, the op-eds, etc., that they must be translated as they travel upwards through various echelons in order for them to actually be digested or even reviewed by people in important decision-making positions. Isn't that the same as saying that the transfer of knowledge from the hands of the intelligentsia to the decision makers is an equivalent of broken telephone?
No, I wouldn't call it broken telephone, but there is definitely very often a major difference between what the desk analyst and the senior intelligence officer, senior strategic planning persons, certainly decision maker, are reading. Now, remember, the young and what they need, the young or just the more junior analyst may be, once let's say they're immersed in their field, once they've been in place for a while, maybe they have a better understanding, a better feel for every little detail of what's happening that day. But as it goes up the chain, you have people who have an increasingly broad perspective and understand it as such, analyze it as such, and they add greater wealth and depth to it if they're doing their job properly. And when it gets up to the decision maker level, they don't want to know every detail. They don't have time. As a former analyst, I must say it was quite disconcerting for me when I learned that, for example, this was an example with Prime Minister Sharon. His aides would take the kinds of reports that he was getting from intelligence and from the other government agencies. And it's not that they would just give him, let's say, the executive summary. They would take a highlighter and mark 2 or 3 lines from the executive summary. That's all he'd read because he doesn't, not because he didn't want to, not because he was a superficial person. These people have no time to breathe. Sharon, as a matter of fact, used to get his first briefing in the morning from his military secretary while he was shaving, literally, because shaving time is time. When you're in those levels, it's incredible. And people are shoving papers in your face as you get into the car. And you're going and meeting with party members and citizens and members of Knesset and foreign dignitaries and officials from it. They are under a kind of time pressure that until you've seen it, and even once you've seen it, is really
I know that might be a strange question, but I never heard it asked before. Why not have like 2 prime ministers instead of 1?
Prime ministers?
Yeah, like for example, one sits in the limo and reads the paperwork and the other one goes out and shakes everyone's hands.
Well, in Israel, to a certain extent, we have that. He's called the president, who's the figurehead and does the ceremonial stuff. Now, of course, the prime minister is still left with some ceremonial activity, and he's left with a lot of political activity, which the president doesn't do. But there is something of a divide in that sense in Israel.
See, that's what I think may be strange because that's why I'm saying it's just a theoretical question, because if the person that's reading your material doesn't have the same amount of decision-making power as you, then that imbalance also it could create an imbalance of responsibility or commitment to actually reading the material. Because the point is that all the information is building up. You're making decisions in real time, reading a few lines out of an executive summary. When the bottom line is that it's okay for today because maybe it's not so pressing. You have to read the full bit on whatever the most pressing priority issues are of the day, of course. But when do you get back around to that material? And by the time you do, what exactly has transpired? I feel like that actually ties into what's happening today. Like if we just drive into the current situation, the transfer of information on October 6th has been a major focus in just the public, and questions around how it was possible for oversight to have even taken place when Israel is such an amazing information superpower. Yeah, it's a scenario that we could drive into, but I wouldn't want to, especially because of what's happening with Israel and Iran. I'm interested in how the prime minister and the president and everyone involved in the decision making process, especially where you fit into this with the different interviews and articles you've been writing. When we move into the active zone of we prevent bad scenarios from occurring by preemptive striking. We have taken ourselves from responding to events as they occur, which is fine because then it gives you time to catch up on information and just deal with what's happening in the day. I think that's how most countries operate. And then moving into a proactive zone where you have to say to yourself, I've reviewed all of the material effectively, or I should at least say so, that I've reviewed sufficient information in order to now make a proactive decision, even if it goes against the advice and guidance of partnering nations that we rely so heavily on for some things.